You're listening to Dodge Movie Podcast. Your hosts are Christy and Mike Dodge, the founders of Dodge Media Productions. We produce films and podcasts, so this is a podcast about films. Join them as they share their passion for filmmaking.
Looking to start a podcast but don't know where to begin? Look no further. The team at Dodge Media Productions has 20 years of experience as podcast listeners and observing the industry and 8 years experience in podcast production. We can help you take your podcast from idea to fruition, and we'll make the process seamless and easy. We'll help you with everything from recording and editing to hitting the charts on Apple Podcasts. So what are you waiting for? Contact us today and let's get started. DodgeMediaProductions.com.
Welcome to the podcast. Today we're going to chat about Crime 101.
Not crime in general.
Not crime in general. This movie was not a crime. I didn't want that to seem like I was throwing shade. I actually liked this film, thought it was a good film. I don't know how to categorize it. It seems like it's part heist or caper film and part just criminal action drama kind of thing. I read a trivia bit that compared it to Heat, and I think that's probably a decent comparison in that it's a tense drama about, I guess you would call it a crime. And we talked about this after the film. I found it interesting that the filmmaker was able to make the Chris Hemsworth character sympathetic, even though his avowed job, all he did was steal things.
Yeah, I was thinking of that this morning, knowing we were going to record today, and I was realizing, and I'm sure we could come up with examples given a little bit more time, but most of the time you align yourself with either the good guys or the bad guys, right? Like Ocean's 11 is a good example where you're rooting for quote unquote the bad guys. You're, because the iconography of all those people and they're the charismatic ones, and we don't mind that they are literally going to steal from Andy Garcia, because the storyline has pitted him as the bad guy. He stole Johnny Ocean's, I think, is that his name?
Danny
Ocean, that's right. So we're rooting for the quote unquote bad guy, right? And in this one, I was like, was I pulling for Hemsworth's character, Davis, it says, or was I pulling for Lou, who was portrayed by Mark Ruffalo? And I don't have a clear answer. So to me, that's good storytelling, because either you go back and forth throughout the film. I think it was definitely told from the Davis character, from his perspective, although we did see kind of some of Lou's life behind the scenes, kind of meaning we saw that his marriage is crumbling, and he doesn't seem like he takes good care of his physical body. He's just trying to survive.
A little side note, they make jokes in there about him being chubby and needing to get into shape.
Yeah.
And I said, that's LA. If Mark Ruffalo is considered chubby, I'm looking at the cast photo and thinking, no, this is a good-looking guy. There's no problems there.
They definitely
at all.
disheveled Ruffalo.
Yeah, well, he could have shaved. That's a little different than needing to lose weight.
They let the gray in his, unless they enhanced it, but they let that come through.
Right. It's a good point that Ruffalo's character we're also pulling for.
Yeah.
And a little bit with Halle Berry's character. Although I have to say her character was not as sympathetic for me, didn't land as much as Ruffalo and Hemsworth characters, and that could just be the way the character is written, not any comment on her performance, but I was less pulling for her. I think her character arc suffered a little bit from perhaps my biggest improvement for the film was I felt like it could have been tightened up, and I noticed that the most in her scenes, where I felt like they were a little long, could have been tightened up a bit more. That was my thinking.
Can I just say to that, I wonder if part of that was, were they trying to shoehorn in, this is the word that I didn't want to say, I necessarily think this, but were they trying to shoehorn in like a C plot?
Right.
And I would think you, of all people, would resonate with this, but I was pulling for her character because she was, I don't know if it's the case of the industry, but she was a female in a male-dominated company and struggling to compete with the others. And then like a new young thing comes in, another female, and so they're pitting the two females kind of against one another. I was rooting for her because it felt like she was a little bit of the underdog.
She was the underdog, and she was the older person.
And then the other thing was, I'm trying not to do too many spoilers because this movie's still in theaters, so I'm trying to be kind to our listeners. She tries a thing and it gets thwarted, which I feel like as a reformed good girl, anytime I thought of stepping outside and breaking some rules, I figured this would be my fate. Like,
right.
You would just get in trouble more.
I thought it was realistic that the business she was in would hire attractive women to separate rich people from their money. I think that's
right, but then why weren't there more women in that company?
Because the writer put it that way. It doesn't make any sense. They have dialogue that specifically says, we use pretty girls, and then you didn't see many in the room. But I was going to say, unfortunately for them, having the plot line that she's getting too old to be the attractive chick falls down when you cast Halle Berry.
Absolutely, absolutely.
We talked about this, that IMDb lists her age as 59. The dialogue in the film lists it as 53. And I say she looks 43.
Yeah, so she's gorgeous.
For me, that was a bit of a bump where I did respond to the old person being shoved out. Certainly that definitely resonated with me. So that's where I said I don't think it was her performance at all. I just felt in the edit perhaps it was a little bit dragged on in some of those scenes. And that's a really interesting balance for the filmmaker, because if you're going to go full action, you go Michael Bay, you cut after every 20 frames, and it's just like a thrill ride. But if you are going to go more like a Heat, that is a slower burn. That's the drama of showing what's unfolding and the suspense of the audience knowing what's up and the characters not knowing. So how do you balance that without making the film too slow? And I'm not saying it was too slow. That was just one thing. There were a couple points in the film where I thought it could have been tightened up. But I liked the analogy of Heat, where it's one of these heist films that depends less on gun battles and more on almost this chess match between the two. And you mentioned it before. I did find myself rooting for both Davis and Lou. I wanted them both to succeed, even though in some ways they were in opposition to each other. But what I would say is good storytelling is they also weren't. Each of those characters, Hemsworth, Ruffalo, and Barry, all had their own path that they were following, but there was a fourth group of people that were actually the classical bad guys, but represented by their henchman, this actor who's from Ireland, so apparently he says his name Keoghan, and to me that was Coogan, but Barry Keoghan is a character actor I would recognize. He played this kind of dumb guy who was really, in some sense, the source of all action in the film. He was the one making decisions, often dumb ones, that drove things forward, changing up what's going on.
It's interesting that you say that, because I realized you're totally right. Ruffalo's character and Hemsworth's character, they had no idea of one another, because then at the end they intersect and they have no idea who the other is.
Correct.
So that's fascinating storytelling too, because oftentimes the cop or the detective will know kind of who they're chasing, but the criminal, I don't know how to, the person they're chasing, the perp, they often are eluding them, right? So it's like, and then because they're eluding them, they're obviously aware of who's chasing them. And these two had no awareness. They were just kind of parallel going along. So it was interesting. And then, like, great storytelling. The other thing that I find hard to carry out that I thought this film did is it's a film that doesn't lay it all out. You know, there's no grand exposition in the beginning to tell you. Like, you spend, I would say, the first half hour just trying to figure out what's going on, who's who are they working for, why are they doing this? But they do it in such a way it's not frustrating. You've commented before when we've watched shows that if it's one of these I don't know what to call it, like developing storylines where you're trying to kind of figure that out. It can get frustrating and almost turn you off to want to continue to watch. And this one did so in a way that was not at all frustrating, kept me engaged. In fact, when I pulled up IMDb just to reference while we're doing this podcast, it said it was 2 hours and 20 minutes, and I would have said it was an hour 50. Like,
Right, yep.
It did not drag, in my opinion. I felt like it moved along nicely, it kept me engaged. I wanted to know what was going on. I wanted to know what was going to happen. And like I said, I was rooting for both of these guys. And you had a tiny little bit of romance in there. You had action, you had adventure. Yes, it was kind of like crime and heisty. It was just a full movie that I wasn't expecting. And I rarely do this, but I went into this movie completely blind. I knew the title and I knew Hemsworth and Ruffalo were in it. That was it. I let you pick what movie we were going to. And ironically, I thought you had picked another one, which was surprised me you picked it because it was a genre I didn't think you really liked. And so I was pleasantly surprised when you said, no, we're seeing this one. I was like, oh, good.
Yeah, I saw the trailer for this many moons ago. I only remembered Hemsworth and a Challenger. So that was what got me there. And I will mention that we don't do driving reviews as much anymore, but credit to the filmmakers because they had a lot of good Chrysler products in there. And the beginning car chase, there were 2 car chases that I recall. They were very good. Then the first one, he's driving a Chrysler 300, which is basically the same chassis and power plant as my vehicle. And then he has a Challenger that he drives later in the film. And I thought the car chases were well done. It's not a car chase film per se. They did reference Bullet. There was a cool Camaro RS that was in there. It was a bit of a car film in that regard, but it was mostly, yes, this evolving drama, this heist film. And you mentioned that things were not given to us and we had to kind of pay attention and hang in there to get them. And I use the example of when I was in middle school, the music teacher said there's a balance in writing a song that if there's nothing repeated, people are confused, they don't understand what's happening. But if there's too much repeated, they're bored because it's repetitious and predictable. So the magic of composition was to find this balance between things that the viewer or listener hears and sees and understands as connecting and then showing them new things. So it's interesting. I think this film did a good job of balancing that because you're right, we had these 3 different storylines going and we had no idea really how they were going to intersect with each other. It's also good that they had this other group of people, and I said kind of represented by Barry Keoghan, who were the real classic bad guys, because that lets Hemsworth Davis be the almost like a hooker with a heart of gold. He's the Robin Hood, where he's doing a thing that you're not supposed to do, but they establish that he's maybe not quite so bad for doing it.
Well, I believe Ruffalo very early on when he's describing the person who he thinks is committing these robberies, he says he doesn't hurt anybody.
Right.
And we hear that line more than once.
Yeah, that's the Robin Hood part. Also, it's a little bit of an easy shot, but they make the villain the insurance companies, and
I'm down with that.
Easy. Yeah, they're like back in the day when it was, the Russians in the 80s in action films.
Now it's
it was
insurance
always the
companies.
Russians. Then it was terrorists, and now it's insurance companies. They're the modern terrorists.
Yes,
and
they
I'm
are.
looking right at you, State Farm.
Yep.
And I thought that when this film, we started after seeing the trailer with the car chase, I thought it was going to be a more classic kind of action crime heist thing. But it ended up being, like Heat, more of a thinker, more of, like I said, a chess game of the strategy as the different characters did different things. For the most part, I thought the characters were all pleasantly intelligent. Sometimes in these movies, people do really dumb things in order to make it easy to get the plot to line up. And in this case, I think they went to some pains to show that Ruffalo was not a dummy bear. He was an experienced detective. We had some dialogue that established that he was really good at detectiving. And then his behavior in the film, I thought, held up with that.
But even he has a challenge because I was trying to look up the character really quick. His boss comes down on him
Oh, that guy,
because he's being like too, I don't know what you'd say, like,
Well,
and I started to wonder if that guy's gonna end up being kind of like in on it and be a bad guy because of how he was criticizing Ruffalo for looking for patterns in, which is probably what all law enforcement, or maybe not law enforcement, but detectives do, right? You're looking for patterns. You're looking like he knew he was always commit robberies close to the 101. And
Right.
and like I said, he didn't hurt anybody. And so he was criticizing him, saying you're looking for too many clues and you're not doing your job. He was Matthew Del Negro. We've seen him in other things. He played Police Captain Stewart.
I think that's realistic, that in order to get promoted in a police department, it's just like any other corporation, that it's the person who plays the game who gets the numbers. They don't care about doing the thing, they only care about the reports having good numbers. Now, what's sad about that is Challenger disaster. That was one of the things they talked about, was people were too focused on the numbers on PowerPoint slides rather than the reality behind it. And I think that's probably true of most corporations, and many police departments are probably more similar to a for-profit corporation than we would understand. But I get that. I'd heard that the DA's office is pressured to get convictions, and it would make sense that the detective department would also be pressured to have a good throughput. We want to get cases closed and convicted and show that we're doing our job and earning our money. So I could see that character being a pain in Ruffalo's butt, but not necessarily corrupt. Just he's a pain because of what he had to do to get that position and to keep it. So there's also a little bit of chicanery as we go through the film about what each of these characters is doing, and so there are some reveals. Again, for superfan Chris, we're not going to share any of that spoiler stuff, but I thought that was surprising in some ways. Some of the reveals I saw coming a little earlier, others I didn't, so they did a good job of, I think, hiding them. They also made sense to me. There was one little bit of Hollywood unrealism where Barry Keoghan's character has a pretty serious crash, and I felt like he just popped up and walked it off.
Yeah.
Which to me, that was maybe a little bit, but I felt like throughout the film there was realistic damage when people got shot or got in fights, and there were realistic damage to vehicles and other things. It felt to me like they lived in a realistic world, not an 80s action hero world, and I like that. I think that helped with the tone of the film.
Now, one could argue that that character looked to be somebody who could maybe alter his state, as well as the adrenaline of that situation. Could you argue that's what popped him up?
I think that's a good point. I hadn't thought of that before. I wonder if there was a conversation on set with the stunt people. No, I can walk away from that. Yeah, I'd be good.
So I just looked up the director, Bart Layton, Layton, Layton.
Yeah.
And it says he's a multi-award winning writer, director, executive producer, known for creating groundbreaking work and pushing the boundaries of conventional storytelling techniques. So I would agree with that, with, like I said, the way he kind of let the story develop.
Sometimes when they say pushing the boundaries, it means it's nonsense. But in this case, it was sense. And I thought it was really well done. This looks to be his first major motion picture that
as
he
a
directed.
director.
Yes. So you might argue that this was a big swing for that, and I think he hit the ball out of the park on this one. It's not the greatest film of all time, maybe, but I was really pleasantly surprised. Again, I kind of went into it thinking it would be more just car chases and shoot 'em up, and it wasn't. I liked the thinking. I liked the visual style of it, how they shot the film. One of the things that comes up is Davis's living situation. He doesn't really have a permanent location, so it made sense to me that they were all very sparse, and that other characters noticed and commented on this. So that was good. There was also an awkwardness to the performance that I think was explained based on the backstory of that character. But when you think Hemsworth, not only is he huge, I was telling you I saw a still from production that a fan had taken, And he is just so much bigger than the crew standing around him that I think we often forget how big some of these muscular actors really are in real life. But he also has a fantastic smile. He's kind of known for that. Yet in this character, he almost had a certain amount of social awkwardness in how he interacted with the other people, which made sense given what we heard about his character. So that too is also, I think, an interesting departure for him, because you would think, oh, you've paid to have this very handsome, very big, very charming actor. You'd want to turn that on. But in a sense, he had a very understated performance, which I liked. Again, I thought Halle Berry did well. She, to me, was very appealing, which matched with, again, the character and highlighted the plot points. And then I don't know, I like Mark Ruffalo and everything he does. There's a certain energy to him that just vibes. A tiny part for Jennifer Jason Leigh.
I was just realizing that as I was looking at the cast. Well,
Right.
and Nick Nolte. And so I actually was thinking this morning, once again, as I was reflecting and getting ready to go into this, I almost am sad that this was a movie. I think this could have been a series, because you could totally delve into an arc. Could be, how did Nick Nolte's and Davis's character connect? What is their payoff? Like, obviously, surface level, it's Nick Nolte's too old to pull these off. And so he farms this out. But really, I don't understand what Davis needed. Oh, I guess it was, what's it called? He was the one that would sell the goods. Yeah, he would fence the goods. So maybe Davis didn't know how to do that, or just to keep his part clean, he was farming that out to Nolte. So anyway, but I think there could be a father-son interaction going on there.
Right.
There could be one betrays the other. I just think that's a whole arc that you could explore throughout a series. And then once again, to Jennifer Jason Leigh, I wanted to see more. Why are her and Ruffalo having problems right now? Were there good times? Do they rekindle at some? I mean, to me, that's a whole arc you could explore and utilize those two fantastic actors more.
Right.
So I think this could very well have been a and then you take Davis, he had a little romantic dalliance in this movie, but because of his line of work, it could be difficult to have an ongoing romantic relationship. So throughout a series, you could explore different women he meets and, and does he accidentally fall in love with like a police officer or, like stuff like that, where there's a little bit of cat and mouse kind of thing. I don't know. I was like, this storyline or characters to me could very well be developed into more.
Interesting that you say that, because if I remember correctly, in Leighton's oeuvre, he had a TV movie that then became a series. So you could maybe do something like this. And when you were talking about the different characters, I was thinking kind of like Quantum Leap for hotties. Every week they'd have another attractive actress that would swing through that for Hemsworth to talk to. I see where you're going with that. Yeah, I think there's a certain amount with Baby Driver where that character of Baby was awkward, and that maybe makes sense if you are in a world of crime like that. Do you have to maintain a certain distance from others so you don't get practice, or you're just isolated and you lose that ability? I thought the dating scenes with Davis were kind of delightfully awkward, where he didn't really seem to kind of know. And then he would dodge his past for obvious reasons. So that was also, again, very interesting, the character. And
that's another whole arc, because, we find out he had a foster mom and it appeared that she took in many young boys. And was she she seemed to be a good person with, her heart was in the right place, but it's difficult, and so it's just like, could you follow the lives of the other boys? Did his life intersect with any of the other kids he met, either in foster care or in her place? Why would a woman, because she appeared to be a single woman, why would she take in all these boys? You know, like that's to me, like that could span through 10 episodes of kind of letting that story develop.
And he has these really nice restored classic cars. Well, who does that work? I guess we could get John Leguizamo back to run that garage where they restore the nice cars. All kinds of ways we can go with this one.
Let me at it, Bart. Give me a call.
Yeah.
I'm not even a story person, and I'm breaking down story here.
Yeah. So there is also, I thought, an interesting part there with Nick Nolte where I asked you, was he, as an acting choice, having a kind of slurred delivery, or had the individual himself, unfortunately, had some health problems?
Did you look it up?
I didn't. I maybe should have for the podcast. Great podcasting, Mike.
Well, I just can't believe you let a question like that go.
Yeah, it's But the question then is, if you're going to introduce a character detail like that, we would normally think, well, you have to explain that to us, even if there's some dialogue. But as you mentioned with the Jennifer Jason Leigh character as Lou's wife, there's stuff there that the director just left to our imagination. And I do like that. I like that the story lived in a complicated world that we didn't follow every thread to its completion, because there were a lot of them we could have looked at and we didn't. Obviously, we're pitching your series now, then the captain, Ruffalo's captain, we would go more into why is he so obsessed with the numbers? Does he have a gambling habit or something? I don't know. Could have a lot of fun with this. Yeah, Bart, give us a call. We got some ideas, man.
Well, so I just Googled, and I'm trying to read and listen to you and be a good podcast. He's 84. So no shade to any octogenarians. They do say he loves to be method. So maybe there's a bit of that sometimes can be for a variety of reasons. Maybe he's choosing to take his lucrative career money and just ride off into the sunset. But I actually, when he popped on screen, I don't know, there was a little, it's probably in the nostalgia because he was big in the 80s when I was coming up, and they say, you know, your favorite music is the music you listened to in high school. So I wonder if that translates to movies. And so he was a big part of the 80s, 90s scene. And so it was like, oh, hey, there's a familiar face playing the graveled old, mentor or fella.
A lot of big names,
Yeah. So I was going to add, as I'm perusing IMDb as we're recording this, and I get to the scores, it's getting a 7, which probably is pretty fair.
Yeah.
I would have maybe given it an 8. I think 7 kind of feels like, it's an okay movie, even though I guess that's 5. I don't know. Everybody's rates things differently.
Yeah.
But I would give this one an 8 if I had to give it a number. But I love this little thing I saw. Somebody gave it a 9 and they said, great dad film.
Okay.
And as a lady, I would say I enjoyed this film, but it might appeal more to the gents. But and maybe what this person means is maybe an older set would appreciate this. And like I said, with the Halle Berry storyline, maybe it's, I don't know how old Bart is, but I liked it.
I did like it. I was pleasantly surprised, but not because I thought it would be bad, but because I had no idea what I was going into. And I think this would be interesting as an example of you don't have to advertise the crap out of a thing, because we saw trailers for Wuthering Heights for, it seemed like 8 months.
God. It turned us off, honestly.
Didn't see the film, probably never will. Just got sick of seeing it. So this one was the opposite. They showed us a trailer once, and then that was it. But I hope it does very well. I think it's a good film. I'm curious to see if people watch it at home, if it lands differently, because I think the big screen could help one of these kind of films just give the tone.
I think also, as someone who, I'll out myself as a huge second screener, I'm glad we saw this in the theater, because I think I would have missed a lot if I tried to second screen this.
Agreed.
And so I'm very glad. So if you do watch this at home, put your phone away, and I say this as someone who always has her phone in her hand.
Even as we podcast.
Yeah, exactly. And so, although I'm not playing a game,
You're not. You're looking at
IMDb,
which is very respectable.
but I don't, obviously, when we're in a theater. I focus on the film, and this is one that I think benefited from that. So yeah, I welcome other people to let us know what they thought of this film, especially in some of the things that we were talking about, because we're trying not to spoil things. So the way the story, I want a word like I keep trying to say like how the story evolved. Maybe that's the word I'm looking for.
Yeah.
The way the story evolved, I really appreciated that. And so good job, Bart.
Yeah, I would say maybe more caper than heist, but definitely a fun caper film.
Yeah.
I do recommend it. Good job, Bart and crew. And never forget, Dodges never stop, and neither do the movies.
Thanks for listening to Dodge Movie Podcast with Christy and Mike Dodge of Dodge Media Productions. To find out more about this podcast and what we do, go to dodgemediaproductions.com. Subscribe, share, leave a comment, and tell us what we should watch next. Dodges never stop, and neither do the movies.